In the twilight of a king's reign, when the shadows of execution loomed like thunderclouds over the court of England, one woman dared to survive the storm. She wasn't the most beautiful. She wasn't the most desired. But she was the one who outlasted them all. She was Catherine Parr, the sixth and final wife of Henry VIII. And her story is not one of submission, but of courage, cunning, and quiet revolution. Born in 1512 at Kendal Castle, Catherine Parr entered the world not as a queen, but as the daughter of a knight. Her father, Sir Thomas Parr, was a respected courtier under both Henry VII and Henry VIII. Her mother, Maud Green, was a lady-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon, the king's first queen, a twist of fate that would cast a long, ironic shadow over young Catherine's life. Educated, intelligent, and fluent in multiple languages, Catherine wasn't molded for courtly flirtations. She was molded for intellect. But in Tudor England, wit was both a weapon and a liability, especially for a woman. By the time she was in her 20s, Catherine had already been widowed, not once but twice. These early marriages, though politically strategic, had shaped her into a pragmatic survivor. Love was rarely part of the equation. Security was. It was at the age of 31, older than any of Henry VIII's previous brides, that Catherine Parr re-entered court life. She was serving as a lady-in-waiting to Princess Mary when the ailing king set his gaze upon her. Henry was obese, diseased, and unpredictable. His court was soaked in paranoia and betrayal. His last wife, Catherine Howard, had been beheaded just a year earlier. But Catherine Parr was not drawn to power. In fact, she had fallen in love with another man, Thomas Seymour, the dashing brother of the late Queen Jane Seymour. Their romance, though discreet, was genuine. And yet, when the king proposed, Catherine understood. Denying Henry was not an option. With trembling resolve she accepted. From the moment she stepped into the role of queen, Catherine Parr walked a tightrope of diplomacy, intellect, and danger. She was the first queen of England to publish books under her own name, a bold act in a world where women's thoughts were expected to remain unspoken. Her writings, deeply Protestant in tone, placed her at odds with the conservative factions of Henry's court. And behind the velvet curtains, enemies plotted. They whispered to the king that his queen was a heretic, that she challenged his authority, that she was dangerous. For a moment, it seemed the axe would fall again. A warrant for her arrest was drawn. But Catherine was no fool. She threw herself at the king's feet, feigning ignorance and submission, telling Henry that her debates were only meant to distract him from his ailments, not to instruct him in theology. The king, flattered and soothed, forgave her. The warrant was torn up. In surviving this ordeal, Catherine Parr became the only one of Henry's wives to argue with him and live. Beyond politics and survival, Catherine did something unprecedented. She brought healing to a fractured royal family. She reunited Princess Mary and Princess Elizabeth with their father. She gave young Edward the stability of a maternal figure. Her palace became a school of learning, and Catherine, a passionate scholar herself, ensured the future monarchs were educated with Renaissance ideals. Elizabeth, especially, would never forget the woman who taught her that power and womanhood were not mutually exclusive. But even as Catherine flourished in this role, time was slipping away. Henry's health was failing, and with it, the precarious balance of her protection. On January 28, 1547, the old king died. Henry VIII, the man who had terrorized, seduced, and transformed England, was gone. And Catherine Parr, for the first time in her life, was not a wife under obligation. She was a queen dowager, wealthy, respected, and finally free to chart her own course. But freedom in Tudor England was never simple. Within months, she rekindled her long-suppressed love with Thomas Seymour, the charismatic, ambitious brother of the late Queen Jane Seymour and uncle to the boy king, Edward VI. Against the advice of many and without royal permission, Catherine and Thomas married in secret. For the first time, she chose love over politics. But the honeymoon would not last. Catherine's marriage to Thomas Seymour was not merely scandalous, it was dangerous. The court was now under the rule of Edward Seymour, Thomas's older brother, who had become Lord Protector to the young King Edward VI. Thomas, always hungry for power, felt overshadowed, and he resented it. Soon he began plotting behind Catherine's back. He courted favor with the boy king. He sought influence. He even behaved inappropriately with the young Princess Elizabeth, who had come to live in Catherine's household. His flirtations with the 15-year-old princess were alarming and heartbreaking to Catherine, who had given him everything. Her home, once a sanctuary of learning, was now poisoned by scandal. And yet, Catherine held her composure. She removed Elizabeth from the household not out of jealousy, but to protect her. Even in the chaos of her final years, Catherine Parr remained a guardian to England's future queen. In 1548, at the age of 36, Catherine Parr experienced something she had never known in all her previous marriages: pregnancy. She was overjoyed. Against all odds, she was to become a mother. In late August at Sudeley Castle, she gave birth to a daughter, named Mary, perhaps in honor of her stepdaughter, the future Queen Mary I. But joy was fleeting. Just 6 days after childbirth, Catherine fell gravely ill with puerperal fever, the same illness that had killed Jane Seymour over a decade earlier. Her condition worsened rapidly. Fevered and delirious, she accused Thomas of poisoning her, a claim that, while never proven, reflected the deep fractures in their bond. On September 5, 1548, Catherine Parr, queen, scholar, reformer, and survivor, died at the age of 36. She was buried with honor at Sudeley Castle. And though history often remembers her as the one who survived, Catherine Parr did more than survive. She transformed. Catherine Parr may have died quietly, away from court and without the spectacle that marked her predecessors' fates, but her influence did not die with her. In fact, it endured, more powerful and profound than any crown she had ever worn. Unlike Henry's other queens, Catherine was a writer, a thinker, and a theologian in her own right. Her books, such as Prayers or Meditations and Lamentations of a Sinner, were deeply Protestant and bravely personal. At a time when women were discouraged from speaking publicly, Catherine Parr published in her own name with the royal seal. She was the first English queen to do so. Her writings would become spiritual guides for the English Reformation, widely read by commoners and clergy alike. Her voice, calm, steady, and clear, echoed in churches and homes long after her body was laid to rest beneath the stained glass of Sudeley Castle. Though she bore only one child by blood, Catherine Parr mothered a generation of English royalty. Princess Mary found in her a stepmother who respected her dignity and tried to reconcile her with her father. Prince Edward received from Catherine not only maternal care but also a strong Protestant foundation that would shape his short reign. But it was Elizabeth, the future Elizabeth I, who would absorb the most from Catherine's influence. Under Catherine's guidance, Elizabeth received a classical education: Latin, Greek, history, philosophy, and scripture. But more than that, Catherine taught her something even rarer: how to survive in a man's world with her mind sharp, her emotions guarded, and her words always measured. The Tudor court was no place for innocence, and Catherine had walked its corridors with wisdom carved from pain. When Elizabeth I would eventually ascend the throne, she would become a queen unlike any before: intelligent, independent, strategic. In many ways, she was the living embodiment of the ideals Catherine had modeled. In an era where queens were expected to be silent, beautiful, and obedient, Catherine Parr quietly rewrote the rules. She was not the seductive Anne Boleyn, nor the pious Catherine of Aragon. She did not give Henry the son he longed for, nor did she die a martyr. Instead, Catherine Parr survived, and while surviving, she changed the very essence of queenship. She transformed the role from consort to counselor, from ornament to orator. She proved that a woman could publish theology, guide princes, challenge kings, and still keep her head. But history almost forgot her. In the centuries that followed, Catherine was often remembered as the nursemaid queen, the survivor, the last wife. Rarely did anyone speak of her intellect, her daring faith, her literary achievements, or her influence on England's golden age. Yet now, slowly, her light returns. Centuries passed. The Tudors became myth. Henry VIII, tyrant and icon, was etched into every page of English memory. His 6 wives became footnotes reduced to a rhyme: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. But Catherine Parr was more than a rhyme, more than a survivor. She was a bridge between eras, between medieval obedience and modern identity. And for those who looked closely, the imprint she left behind was not faint. It was foundational. In the scholarly circles of the 20th and 21st centuries, Catherine's legacy was pulled from the shadows. Historians pored over her books, her letters, her choices. They uncovered a woman not passive but deliberate, not lucky but wise, not merely the final wife, but the first English queen to define power through intellect rather than lineage. In recent decades, Catherine Parr has become a subject of fascination not just for historians, but for feminists and authors, playwrights and poets, all drawn to the quiet courage of a woman who defied the rules without shouting. Catherine didn't wear armor. She didn't carry a sword. But she fought battles, ideological ones, in a world that silenced women. She carved space for herself in a male-dominated world, wielding her pen like a blade. Her theological writings, her reformist leanings, and her political diplomacy were not accidents. They were carefully chosen acts of resistance, couched in grace but fierce in principle. Modern readers now revisit Lamentations of a Sinner not as dry scripture, but as a bold female voice crying out for spiritual reformation, personal agency, and redemption in a society that left no room for either. Some say Catherine Parr was a premonition of Elizabeth I, not biologically but ideologically. Where Henry VIII left destruction, she planted the seeds of renewal. Where others sought survival, she sought legacy. She showed Elizabeth, and the women who would follow, that the mind could be sharper than any sword, and that influence need not come through loud rebellion, but through steady resistance. She lived a life composed not of spectacle, but of intention. And while Henry's reign was marked by thunder and blood, Catherine's chapter was a quiet sunrise, the kind one only notices when looking back. In the grand tapestry of Tudor history, it is easy to be dazzled by bloodshed, scandal, and royal spectacle. Easy to remember Anne Boleyn's ambition, Jane Seymour's son, or Catherine Howard's tragedy. But Catherine Parr defied definition. She was the queen who outlived the tyrant, not because she stayed silent, but because she knew when to speak and when to survive. She was the wife who healed a shattered royal family, the stepmother who became a mentor, the author who gave voice to faith in a time of danger, and the woman who, even in death, illuminated a path for generations of women who would come after her. She had no coronation, no grand portrait to rival the others, no grand palace of her own. But Catherine Parr wore a different kind of crown, one of reason, restraint, and resilience. A crown carved not of gold but of ink and fire. Catherine Parr's story is not one of romance. It is not one of power taken by force. It is the story of a woman who read, who thought, who led with compassion and ruled with care. A woman who bore the weight of 5 marriages, 4 of them unwanted, and still found the strength to love again, to educate, to publish, to believe. In her world, survival was an act of rebellion, and in her silence there was strength. In her writings, wisdom, and in her life, a legacy that outshone even the king who made her queen. Catherine Parr, the 6th wife of Henry VIII, was never meant to be a footnote. She was a chapter, a woman ahead of her time, a queen who changed the story. She survived, yes, but more importantly she lived. Catherine Parr, survivor, scholar.